So now we've got a great panel on US-India philanthropy by philanthropists based here in the US and doing outstanding work in India and here in the US as well. And moderating the panel is going to be Indiaspora's patron member Shyam Lal. So Shyam, if you'd like to come up, please. And the panelists are going to be Indiaspora's founder circle members Frank Islam and Sunil Wadhwani.
So it's quite an honor to present two very remarkable, inspiring men, Frank Islam and Sunil Wadhwani. Both of them founders and very successful businessmen in their own rights, very early in their careers, who at some point built a foundation from which they inspired themselves to do a lot of very good, on both sides, on the India side as well as on the US side. And they both don't rest. They continue to innovate, they continue to think, and they all have, both have new ideas. I'm not going to over-introduce you, but Frank built a company of 2,000 people, $300 million in revenues, before he has become what I would call a very generous philanthropist, a very engaged and thoughtful civic thinker, and a patron and supporter of the arts and education. And Sunil likewise co-founded and led, shaped, and built two phenomenal companies, iGate and Mastech, and then turned his attention to building a sustainable health organization, WISH, in India. And the last thing I'll say about both of them is they both continue to look ahead. In Frank's case, he's thinking a lot about freedom of media and press, and has thoughts about where to take that. And in Sunil's case, he's thinking about how do you bring artificial intelligence and those capabilities to bear on the social sector in India. So they're just not sitting still, they're thinking ahead. With that, if I might, maybe I start with you, Sunil. If you could talk a little bit about the pivot that you made from building businesses to making a huge difference in India. How did that motivation come? And what lessons have you learned that you could share with this community?
I think after that yoga, it's okay if I get into a few deep thoughts over here. I think as we get older in life, all of us in this room are very blessed, right? Growing up in India, I think many of us were born in India, grew up there. It doesn't matter where you are in India, you're surrounded by poverty, right? You could be living in the best part of Bombay or Delhi or wherever. Poverty is very close by. So you see that. As you grow up, you realize how much of life is luck, right? What we might call blessings. Those of us that were blessed to be born into a good family that could afford to educate us, send us to a decent school, and then we could come to the US, that's fairly rare. Yes, we all worked hard when we got over here, et cetera, et cetera. But things could have been so different if we'd been born just 500 yards away into some family in a slum. We would probably still be living there. So as you grow up, you realize you're thankful for your blessings, and then the best thing you can do is give back in a way to help people who weren't quite that fortunate. In my case, I've always had this interest in healthcare. The first company I started was in the healthcare field, a medical device company. Company didn't survive, unfortunately, but I learned some lessons from that. My next 2 or 3 companies were a little bit more successful. So when I started thinking about what can I do to give back, I said, can I combine a healthcare with this little knowledge I've gained of technology? Is there some way to apply that innovation to healthcare? And thirdly, because many of us have built organizations here that have scaled up. So this company, iGate, that I started, at peak, we grew to over 34,000 employees 2 years ago when I sold the company. So you learn lessons about scaling up, what works, what doesn't work, et cetera. And then you say, okay, how do I apply all of this? So 3 years back, I started a healthcare foundation in India called the WISH Foundation. The idea is how do we transform substandard primary healthcare systems in India to now be functional, be effective. This is in remote parts of India as well as in urban slums. So in 3 years, we've kind of grown. We're running 300 health clinics right now. This year, we'll treat about 4 million patients, free healthcare, 4 million of the poorest people in India. And when you look at the scale of the challenge, right, that's the first lesson. Don't get intimidated by the scale. You know, there's 500-600 million people in India without good healthcare. Just think of the 1 family or the 10 family or the 10,000 families that you're helping. you're changing their lives. So that's what we did. The foundation continues to scale up. And as Shamlal just mentioned, there's a new venture, a new nonprofit venture that my brother and I are now planning to start. He has his own family foundation in India that focuses on education and skills training. I've got this healthcare foundation. And we've been saying for a while, why don't we do something together? And he's also a technology entrepreneur. And so we're starting an artificial intelligence institute in India, which will focus strictly on how to apply AI research for social good. How do we apply the latest AI research into how do we improve healthcare for the poorest and education and agriculture and so on? So we just hired a CEO. He started this week, and we'll see where that journey takes us.
Thank you, Sunil. Frank, if I turn to you, I would argue a very similar pivot, but a very different one geographically in terms of diversity of things that you're doing. You're obviously doing a lot in India, but you're also giving back a lot to the community here. So it'd be interesting for you to compare and contrast a little bit.
Well, thank you, Sunil, and thank you, Shyam. And let's give a big round of applause to MR.
Yes.
So when I sold my business in 2017 to Baro Systems Corporations, my wife Debbie and I started a foundation that focuses on four things: education, which I talked a little bit about, the art, and also the third thing that we focus on is the peace, and also the civic engagement. And the freedom of press is a part of the civic engagement. And the reason we started this foundation, because we believe what President Kennedy once said, to whom much is given, much is expected. It is much more rewarding to me to give back than any money that I have made all in my life. And what I practice what I call a purposeful philanthropy. The purposeful philanthropy focuses on making a difference, having a strong impact and influence in people's lives, and creating a better world and a society that's sustainable by doing good. And it's just not giving the money and writing a check. It's much more than that. It's the giving your time, your talent, your ideas, and being a volunteer. The focus and purpose of philanthropy that I practice is giving a helping hand, not a handout. To me, charity is a handout, but the philanthropy is a hands up. My deepest and fondest hope and expectation is that the people that I have made investment, because I believe the philanthropy is making investment that can potentially yield exponential returns. That if I make investment in an individual or an organization, that will in turn make the investment in others, and that will make my investment sustainable. But it is our responsibility to give back to our community, to our country, and we have a dual obligation, not only to give back to India, which I have done many, many things there, and also in the United States. I would also say that the art, the reason that I focus on art, my wife Debbie and I are a member of the Kennedy Board Center, John F. Kennedy Center Performing Arts. But art nourishes the roots of culture. Art transcends all boundaries. Art connects and engages people, and it represents the best of our humanity. And it is important for all of us to instill the love of not only education, but also the education that relates to the art.
Thank you, Frank. Maybe I'll pick up on one of your points, which is when you started to talk about the difference between the contribution of resources and the contribution of your human capital, your ideas, your creativity, your entrepreneurship. Sunil, if I go to you, how would you speak? I mean, you both did very well financially and are able to help with the resources a lot, but you've also both given a lot of yourself. And what advice would you give to most of us who may not be in a position to do as much with resources, but have a lot of appetite to make a difference?
I wouldn't presume to give any advice. I think this is a very accomplished group over here that in many ways has done way more than Frank and I have. Having said that, we all develop certain strengths. We all learn lessons over here, whether we are scaling technology companies or working in the arts or working with an NGO. And the key is how do you apply all of that? And I think when we invest, whether it's in the US or in India, and when I say invest, I'm talking about investing in helping others succeed and serving the underserved. We try and bring in these lessons. So as I said, in my case, it was technology and scaling, et cetera. Similarly in Frank's. But I'll tell you, giving money in a way is easy. It feels good. But getting actually one's intellectual and emotional engagement is really what gives you rewards. And there are times, yes, we are helping others, but more than anything else, I think I'm helping myself. You learn different things in the nonprofit world. You learn different things when you're serving people. Again, you get reinforced every day how blessed you are. And other people aren't quite as blessed. So I think the more we get engaged, like you said, by whether it's through giving talent, creativity, time, etc., the more meaningful it becomes for us.
Very, very helpful. And I know it's not advice, but it's good experience.
Great experience.
Yeah. So, for Frank, maybe if I could ask you, there's an aspect of your contribution that really stands out to me, which is your thought leadership on civic employment, small business issues, and there's a whole range of them. Could you maybe share some of the 2 or 3 biggest thoughts you have that affect this country?
Well, and I will change the conversation a little bit. First of all, the small business and entrepreneurship drives the economy of these great nations. As you probably know, the 90% of the businesses are a small business in this country, and we need to give them the capital to make sure they can start the business and they can flourish. The civic engagement part is important for all of us to be civically engaged, because that will create a country that works for all, not just for selected few. And that's the reason we should be politically engaged as well. So we have a seat on the table and make sure that our voices are heard. I just got back from a school of journalism, Missouri School of Journalism, and I wanted to talk a little bit about it, the fact that we have endowed a journalist scholarship program for the people from India to come to the United States. And the idea will be for them to go to school at Missouri School of Journalism, and also they also attend some of these organizations where they probably get a training, and they have gotten training in Pittsburgh Gazette and Chicago Tribune, as well as the Washington Post. And the reason we got involved in this thing because the fact that we believe firmly in freedom of press. Freedom of press is the cornerstone of our democracy. Freedom of press is enshrined in our democracy, in our Constitution. We should embrace the freedom of press, not to bury them. And it also allows us to make sure that we have a check and balance in this country, and this is how our American system is built up. And that's the reason we get these people, journalists from India, to come to the United States, so that they can learn some of the things what we're doing in terms of our democracy, our values, our conscience, our culture. And they can go back to their country, and especially to India, and use some of the lessons learned experience. As a matter of fact, when I talked to Smita Rajan, and she was the fellowship that we got from the DNA, which is locally, I believe, in Gujarat, she said one of the things that she has learned about the facts finding. So it's a facts finding, and she, because she worked at Portugal, so that will allow her to go back and talk about some of the things in India about the, facts, not fiction, and not the fake news, which we have right now in America. So we want to make sure that she will take those lessons learned experience and apply that experience back in India.
Thank you for that. We have 4 or 5 more minutes, so I would love to take maybe 2 questions from the audience.
There's one here. So my question is, thanks. This is Sadanand Dhume from AEI. My question specifically is for Frank, and I have a sort of vested interest in this because I came to India to study from India to study journalism at Columbia many years ago, and I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing. But I think there's sort of one end of this issue, which is training people in the highest standards of the craft, giving them a sense of what journalism is about, in this country. But there's an entirely different set of issues around freedom of speech and freedom of the media. And I know that there's sort of contested views, but my own view, and I've been writing about this in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, is that that is declining, that is being eroded. Not because it was perfect before, there were always flaws, but those flaws are, under the present circumstances, there's sort of, the weaknesses are being exploited more, and we're sort of coming to a situation where I would argue that the capacity of the media to play the kind of role that it plays here is actually declining rather than. So how do you address that larger question, the macro issue, so to speak, while doing this great work on the micro issue?
Well, I want journalists to ask the tough questions so they can expose their stories. And Washington Post and New York Times are doing a great job, but not the Fox News. So that's according to the administration, is a fake. They think anything that does not favor them is a fake news. So the freedom of press and the freedom of media is attacked in this country. There's no question about it. India is also. As a matter of fact, my next column will be on the freedom of press in Times of India, which will be published in about a week from now. And the thing which is what I consider a concerning to all of us is that there are two journalists, and I cannot, one of them that I do know, because she is the ex-wife of Chidu, who is the person, as you all know, with the Times of India representative. His ex-wife, Gauri, got killed in India because she exposed them a story of certain individuals, organizations that did not favor to them. And there's another person who got killed. So that's a very concerning to all of us, that the freedom of press is an attack in India. And it should not be the case, because that is the part of the Constitution. It's a part of the, not only the Constitution, this is how the democracy flourishes. And that has been attacked in India, India as well as the United States. So that's concerning to me, and I hope you write something on it to make sure that the India has the freedom of press and also freedom of expression, freedom of faith. Faith is also one of the attack in India in terms of inclusive. We need to build a stronger, fairer, just, tolerant India as well as America. We are stronger together, and together we can help shape a better future for India as well as for America.
There's one more question back there. Yeah, go ahead. It'll be the last one.
It's okay, shout it out.
Atul.
All right. So Atul Singh, and I am in the media space, and my question is similar to what Sadanand raised. I'll just add some statistics. So, according to the 2014 Pew Research Center report, there was one job in journalism in the US for 5 jobs in public relations. What that means is, even when you are in the media, and of course Wall Street Journal is also owned by Rupert Murdoch, the same guy who owns Fox News, which is where Sadanand writes. Which is not a comment on him, but just the ownership pattern in this industry. Point is that when you have such a withering away of the backbone of the press, which is journalism, which comes from the economic model as well. We could go into that till tomorrow, but the point is, what is the vision you have, Frank, because you've engaged with it, in terms of combining the role of the fourth estate, which is holding the powerful to account, which comes from the French Revolution and earlier, Edmund Burke actually, and of course, the second aspect is to inform and educate the public. And if you look at Europe, it does a better job partly through public institutions that are autonomous, but some parts of Europe, not all, of course. But the question is, how do you do that in India or US?
I think I want MR to answer because it's beyond my pay grade here. Atul is a good friend. Give him a bigger round of applause. He writes at Fair Observer, and he's also from my hometown, Azamgarh. And he's a great journalist, and his points are well taken, and it is a concerning to all of us. And the Fox News was a good example, and Wall Street Journal, which is owned by the Rupert Murdoch. But I hope that the independence of the media will be key ingredient of success and prosperity to this country. It is not as bad in the United States as in India is. Most of the newspaper and the TV's organizations are probably owned by the tycoon, but people who are business people, and obviously they want to make sure their voices are heard. That they're not doing a service to the country by exposing some of the things that either the ruling party or the other parties are doing that. So I don't really have that much of an answer, but I would say that's a concern to all of us, and we got to continue to write on these things. So Neil, you have something to add to it?
I'm just going to take 30 seconds and take the discussion back to where we started, maybe as a closing comment.
That's a good
I mean,
point.
this is a great discussion. We could spend a couple of hours on this. But in terms of giving back, both in the US and India, I think all of us over here are doing that in different ways. The point I want to make is that it doesn't take a lot of money. It doesn't take a lot of time. You don't have to set up your own NGO. There's 3 million NGOs in India. There's 1.5 million NGOs in the US. Whatever strikes you, whatever resonates with you, whether it's helping the elderly, whether it's helping underage, kids with nutrition, whether it's education, whatever, there are people out there doing good work, and they are looking for others to help them, not just financially, but others to get involved. So I encourage all of you, and again, we're all doing this in different ways, to do this. And you don't have to invent the wheel. You can team up with other people doing it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to say one thing. It's a short thing, which is great generosity seems to come from great caring and great humility. And I see that in spades in both of you. And I see a lot of caring and humility in this room. So I think your point is well taken. Thank you.
Thank you.